Hey, how's it going? In today's video, I'm going to give you some insight on how you can negotiate buying a house. Since 2020, housing affordability has drastically decreased, home prices have increased by 20%, and also interest rates have almost tripled since 2020. So now more than ever, you need to understand how you can negotiate buying a house. Now, for some context, right now, as of September 30th, 2024, a lot of things have happened. Right now, interest rates are hovering around 6%. Before they were around 7.5%. The Fed has decided to decrease their interest rates by around 0.5%. And the National Associations of Realtors have decided to change the realtor commission procedures. Now, with all those things happening, it can be very, very intimidating in how you can either just buy a house. You might think that 6% interest rates is still really high, and you might even need to pay your own realtor 3%. Now, how are you even going to be able to buy a house if you just barely were able to buy a house, but now you need to pay your own realtor? And then on top of that, the housing market just seems super unstable just from the outside the box perspective. Well, that is the entire point of this video. In this video, I'm going to give you some insights on all the things that you need to understand when you are buying a house, the different things you can look at, and how you can structure a deal so that you can get the best bang for your buck when it comes to buying a house or maybe even selling your own house. Okay. So, one of the most important things that you need to do when either buying or selling a house is you first need to isolate what are the different costs going to be for either the buyer or the seller. For example, here I have a Google Doc and we're going to be looking at the different costs associated for both the buyer and the seller. At the end of the day, a deal is not going to get closed unless both parties are happy. So when it comes to negotiating a deal, if you can figure out some type of structure where everyone is happy and you get as much things as you can, it's a win-win because no one wants to come out of a deal feeling like they just lost a lot of money. So that is why if you try to see what each party has at stake when it comes to this deal, you can fine tune different things so that everyone is happy when it comes to just closing the deal. When we are looking at the buyer, there's a lot of things that need to be considered. Okay. For example, when we are looking at a buyer, we need to consider this. When someone is buying a house, the most immediate price is the sales price of the house because this is the money that they are going to be needing to spend out of pocket to buy the house. Along with the sales price of the house, we also need to layer in a whole nother thing. And this is if someone needs a loan to take out a house, because most people, they don't have 6 figures of cash just casually sitting in their bank account. Therefore, they're going to have to take out a loan to buy a house. And with that process of taking out a loan, you're going to have to pay additional money for getting that loan. So here I have closing costs. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the loan closing costs, you're going to have costs that are attached to the appraisal, origination fees from the loan costs, escrow, which includes insurance and taxes. And then you're also going to have to pay some per diem interest. And then you also have to pay a title company. Just with the information on the buyer side, it's ridiculously complicated. However, at least you are watching this video and you're already dipping your toes a little bit in terms of the information that you need to understand. So at least you know this now. Moving forward, as you go on through this process, you're going to see these things multiple times come up, and then you'll be more comfortable with these different costs when it comes to buying a house. One of the first things that I want to point out here is, look, if you have cash and you can buy a house without a loan, you don't have to worry about these loan costs. You don't have to order an appraisal. You don't have to worry about the loan costs. You don't even need to worry about having an escrow accounts. Okay. You can avoid all these things in terms of the appraisal, loan costs, escrow, and even interest because you're just buying the house with outright cash. Okay. That doesn't exclude you from paying insurance and property taxes. However, that's still a lot less money that you need to sacrifice because now you don't have to pay interest or origination charges for a loan. When you buy a house with cash, you also need to make sure that you have title. So title, if you do not know what title is basically a receipt for you buying the house, making sure that when you bought the house, no one else has any ownership of the house. So meaning that you basically own the house free and clear, and you don't have to really worry about not having complete ownership over your house. And on the off chance that you don't own your house, okay, title insurance is basically going to help cover any costs associated with title issues. Okay. Now, when you buy a house, let's go ahead and say we got pre-approved, did the appraisal, did everything, and the title of the house is under your name. What are you responsible for? Because look, when you have a house, you're basically sacrificing two things. You're sacrificing a mortgage payment, whether or not you have a loan where you have to pay principal and interest, you still have to pay property taxes and insurance yearly. And then on top of that, you're completely responsible for an entire house. You now need to take care of the lawn. You need to keep an eye on the roofing. You have to deal with the electrical components of the house, the plumbing, HVAC, and all those other responsibilities associated with the house. Okay, so that's what you're basically trading. Now we need to understand, what are the costs associated with the seller? What is the main incentive for a seller wanting to sell their house? And it's quite simple here. I have it right here. If we look right here, it is cash. The seller of the house gets a net proceeds of selling the house, which is cash and also no responsibility of the house. So they have peace of mind. They don't have to worry about that property anymore. Okay. The main point when it comes to negotiating a deal for buying a house is, what is the net cash that the seller of the house is going to be getting? Because look, when the seller of the house is selling a house, they also have additional costs that they need to pay. Most of the time, when someone is selling a house, they don't want to sell it because they just cost too much for them, or they just don't want the responsibility. So when someone is selling a house, before they even get a check for them for the net difference of the money that they have to pay liens on the house. And these liens can come in the form of IRS taxes, mechanics liens, property taxes, and different things like that. Or even the first mortgage on the house if they had a mortgage to buy the house in the first place. When this sales price of the house gets paid, okay, by the buyer, they have to pay all these other things first. So they have to pay the liens on the house, property taxes that are due for the house. Then on top of that, they have to pay 6% in realtor commissions. But keep in mind, we had a change in the realtor commission structure, but now it is up for debate who's going to be paying the realtors. Because at least on the seller side, the seller is going to be paying 3% to their own realtor. Now, what ends up happening is, if a buyer comes in with their own realtor, they basically have to say that they're responsible with paying the realtor. Now, depending on how much that contract is set up, normally it's 3%. Now, if the seller doesn't pay the buyer's realtor, then depending on the realtor and how they have their commissions, the buyer now needs to pay their own realtor. So since we have that additional components of the NAR settlement, this actually increases the costs for the buyer. Then when it comes to the cost of the seller, depending on the house, there's going to be some contributions that they need to pay towards title. And then because selling a house is a little bit difficult for our current point in time, sellers are even willing to give seller concessions to help contribute towards all these closing costs when it comes to buying a house, when it comes for the buyer. Okay. So there's different restrictions, and depending on what loan program that the buyer is going in, but these seller concessions can go anywhere between 3 to 6% of the sales price of the house. So now let's say that we have a house that is under contract and everything is going smooth, nothing pops out. Then when we go ahead and get the appraisal comes back and they find out that something's wrong with the house. Well, now if the seller wants to sell the house, then they have to go ahead and repair any potential damages that the underwriter or the lender doesn't like in regards to the house. So one perfect example of this is one recent transaction that I did. The lender didn't like on how there were bars across the windows for the bedroom windows. So the seller of the home had to go ahead and pay out of pocket to replace those windows. And then my client, the borrower or the buyer, had to basically pay an extra fee to help cover the cost of the appraisal update. Just in that example is just something that, like, on how repairs can influence on how the house is going to be sold and also negotiated. Okay. So once again, this is a lot of information. Please feel free to go ahead and take a little break, pause the video, stretch, do something, recoup. Now, before I go ahead and move forward and show how you can use all of this information to help negotiate a deal, please go ahead and do me a huge favor, like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm a brand new channel, and anything you do is going to help me out tremendously. So, okay, now that we have all of this information, which is a lot, I will agree, you now can start to begin on how you can kind of structure the deals when it comes to being able to buy or even sell your own house. And that is why in this industry, there's people like loan officers in real estate that basically get all of this process and basically help you in regards to either buying or selling a house. And then if you don't have 6 figures of cash saved up in your savings account, then that's when you need to get a loan, and that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, that is why realtors and loan officers get paid their commissions to do this deal, because I'm going to be honest, this is a lot of information. Now, one thing I do want to note, when it comes to the buyer's realtor, when it comes to negotiating the price, a good buyer's realtor is worth their weight in gold, because they save you a lot of money just in being able to structure the sales contract to get you the best deal possible. Now, every single person is going to have different requirements, different prices, different mortgage payments, different costs. And that is why the more knowledge that you can attain and learn in the beginning is going to help you out further down the line. Because once again, once you see all of this information, it's going to help you out because at least you have some type of insight and it's not your first time being exposed to this. Because I'm pretty sure if this is your first time learning about anything like this, you're going to be overwhelmed. Okay. So, talking about the negotiating of the sales price of the house. Okay. Now, as a buyer, the main thing you need to concern yourself with is this: how much money do you have to spend out of your pocket to buy the house? And how much money are you going to need to pay on a monthly basis to basically own the house? So, whether or not you take out a mortgage, which you now have a mortgage payment where you have principal and interest, or you just buy the house upright with cash, now you have a taxes and insurance payment for the house. You need to understand how much money are you going to need to pay out of pocket just to buy the house. Now, if you buy a house with cash, it's literally just the sales price of the house and potential realtor costs, and then also title costs of the house, which is very simple. So if you are going to be ending up paying your realtor 3%, now you need to increase the sales price of the house by 3% so they can help cover the realtor. And then also you need to see what costs you need to pay for the title. That's what you need to understand, how much money that you need to pay out of pocket. Now, as a buyer, you now need to understand this: how much money is the seller willing to settle with after all of their costs? And you don't need to know exactly what the seller is getting. However, you're going to have some type of idea in terms of how much money the seller is going to be getting. Okay. Because if you just break it down based off of this list, okay, we're going to have a sales price. Let's say we have a sales price of $200,000 right here. And there's going to be 6% commission that is getting paid towards the realtors. We are going to go ahead and assume that we found a seller that is willing to pay our realtor their commission. Now, just to keep this simple, what we're going to go ahead and do is this: we're going to get that 6% charges for the realtor commissions, multiply that by the sales price of the house, and that ends up coming to $12,000. Okay. So just to keep this even more simple, we're just going to add that on to the $200,000. So for this example, the real sales price of this house is going to be $212,000. $212,000. Okay. So if we have a buyer that wants to buy this house for $212,000, right? Let's just say that there are no liens on the house. There's no property taxes, no nothing. All we have to worry about is the realtor commission and also just potential title expenses. Let's just say for this case, the title expenses for the seller is just $3,000 flat out. And then even on that, we'll go ahead and say that this cost for title is just going to be split and divided in half. Half goes to the seller and then half goes towards the buyer in terms of what they need to pay for. Okay. So if you are selling a house for $212,000, where $12,000 has to go towards paying realtors, and then on top of that, $1,500 needs to go towards paying title. Well, in all reality, the seller house is going to be getting around $198,500 of cash from the proceeds of selling this house. And this doesn't even include any potential property taxes, any liens they have on the house. Let's just say for everything, and this doesn't even include any additional costs on the house, which comes in terms of the liens, property taxes, seller concessions, or even potential repairs when it comes to repairing the home. So as we recall, we stated that the buyer of the house is going to have to pay the sales price of the house and also loan closing costs, right? But just because we have the sales price of the house and loan closing costs doesn't mean that it's going to be all the money that's coming out of the pocket. Because if you get a loan to buy a house, the loan is going to be covering a great majority of you purchasing the house. Okay. We're going to go ahead, keep this even more simple, and we're going to say that the buyer of the house had to come in with just 0% down for the down payments, but there was, let's say, $10,000 in closing costs. If the sales price for the buyer was $112,000, but there's also $10,000 in closing costs, so technically the buyer is going to be spending around $222,000, and $10,000 is going to be coming out of pocket. And then let's just say that the mortgage payment for the house is $2,000. So we have here mortgage is going to be $2,000. Okay. So now what happens when the buyer of the house doesn't have that $10,000 to close and buy the house? Let's just say they only have $5,000. So then what ends up happening is what they could do is ask for seller concessions from the seller of the home. If the buyer asks for $5,000 to help come towards closing, right now, instead of getting $198,500, right? And we ask for 5,000 seller concessions, the money that the seller is going to be getting back is going to be $193,500 because they had to help contribute towards closing costs through the form of seller concessions. So, just by understanding how this process works, you're going to have a lot better understanding on like what is the incentive for the seller of the home, how much money they're going to be getting. Obviously, you're not going to know the indiscriminate details for their transaction now. However, you're going to have a good understanding because when you submit a sales contract, you should know how much you're going to be paying your realtor or if the seller is going to be paying your realtor. This is a very, very long video. However, this is a very, very good foundation in just being able to understand that everything in real estate is negotiable. Okay. Now, you are going to have limits in terms of how much you could ask in terms of seller concessions, how much you need for a down payment, how much you need for the closing costs, and all that stuff. However, the main point is when it comes to trying to figure out how you can negotiate the deal, if you're able to consider the costs for repairs, you know how much the seller is going to be getting paid roughly, and you know the different individual components for this entire process, you can now see on where you can basically push and pull the different processes in the sales negotiating of the particular house. For example, here's something that you can do. Let's just say we find out that for this particular house that is being for sale at $112,000, that the seller of the house is expecting at least $190,000 in cash back that they're going to be receiving. Just with that understanding, right? You can now use that information as a requirement in terms of being able to structure the deal. So maybe each realtor is willing to sacrifice 1% of their commission so that instead of getting paid that $5,000 in seller concession, if each realtor ends up sacrificing for 1% to help the client buy the house, that's a total of $4,000 that can be contributed towards purchasing the house. When it comes to the realtor and the commission, although they're missing out on basically $2,000 each, at least they're still getting paid $8,000 in total for the both of them when it comes to the commission. So what's better, zero commission because the deal fell through and there was no negotiating then, or the buyer being able to buy the house, lock up the house, transfer title, and everything. Seller of the house gets all the cash they wanted, and then also the realtors get paid a little bit of the commission. Or let's just say we go and take a look at even the closing costs. Maybe the loan officer is charging a little bit too much when it comes to the origination points, or maybe even the lender can give you some additional money through grants or first time home buyer loan programs to buy the house, right? There's different things in this entire process that can help you structure and how you can buy the house. Okay. Now, this is a lot of information. Trust me, I get it. And look, that is why in this industry we have realtors and loan officers. Their main job is to basically help you out throughout this whole entire process because let me tell you one thing. This industry is very, very complicated. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, and there's a lot of things that need to be considered when it comes to buying a house. And that is why when it comes to buying a house, you need to make sure that you have a very, very strong team. Your loan officer is going to be your best friend when it comes to figuring out your finances, how much you can get approved for, how much money you can be getting cash back. They should be able to deal with all the numbers. Now, the realtors are basically there to help protect you when it comes to being able to formally sell your house, represent you, disclose information to you, and basically also negotiate the sales price of the house so that you are happy with your transaction and the potential buyer or seller is happy with their transaction. And that is the entire reason why we have professionals in this industry because this process is intimidating. Look, what I told you here is literally, I've been in this industry for 3 years. And even myself, I'm still learning new things that can be layered on top of this, right? Like, let me give you one example. When it comes to getting an appraisal for the house, like if you are missing a smoke detector, you now need to pay an additional $400 because the appraiser didn't take a picture of the smoke detector. Just having a good team and trying to figure out that what the things you need to understand, what are the costs, what are the pros and cons of each transaction and the different things you can do. Just by having a good team, you're going to be able to get super far ahead when it comes to going through the learning curve. But at the same time, you also need to make sure you trust your team, you vet them, you understand what they say, and everything aligns with what they say. Okay. So that is all that I have for today's video. I hope I gave you some insight on how you can negotiate buying a house, whether or not you're either the buyer or you're even the seller. This whole process is very, very intimidating. And if you need help either buying, refinancing, or even selling a house, please feel free to contact me via phone or email in the link description or comments. If you can please go ahead and do me a huge favor, please like and subscribe and comment or even share this video to help someone that you know is buying a house or even refinancing a house or even selling a house. So that is all for today's video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And other than that, goodbye.